First puzzle, the threats are: rook takes queen. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are: rook to c8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to c4, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is: queen to c4, check. King to f8. Rook takes queen. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in this position are: queen takes rook, check. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn, checkmate. Rook takes rook. King takes knight. Here are the checks: queen to g7, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to h7, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn, checkmate. Knight to f6, check. The puzzle is solved using: knight takes pawn, checkmate. One more. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are checks in puzzle position: queen to e4, check. Queen to f4, check. Queen to f6, check. Queen to g4, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen to d1, check. Queen to e3, check. Queen to d3, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is: queen to e4, check. King to c5. Queen to c4, check. King to d6. Queen takes queen. Another one. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Here are the checks: queen to g2, check. Queen to g1, check. The answer is: queen to g2, check. King to e1. Queen to h1, check. King to d2. Queen takes rook. Let's continue. The threats are: bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is: bishop takes pawn. Queen to g5. Bishop takes rook. Another one. The threats are: queen takes knight, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. Here are the checks: queen takes knight, check. Queen to f7, check. Queen to g7, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is: queen takes knight, check. King takes queen. Knight takes pawn, check. King to f7. Knight takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. The threats are: rook takes pawn, check. King takes bishop. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are: rook takes pawn, check. Queen to h2, check. Queen to h1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The answer is: queen to h2, check. King to f1. King takes bishop. Next, the threats are: rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes bishop. Here are checks in puzzle position: rook takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Knight to f3, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle: rook takes pawn, check. King to h1. Rook takes pawn. Bishop to f4. Rook takes queen. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position: rook takes bishop. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes bishop. Let us look at checks in puzzle position: queen takes rook, check. Queen to g5, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is: queen takes rook, check. King to b2. Rook takes bishop. Queen to e5, check. Queen to g7. Next puzzle. Here are the threats: knight takes queen. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes bishop. King takes knight. Rook takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is: knight takes queen. One more. Here are the threats: rook takes rook, check. Bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position: rook takes rook, check. Queen to h2, check. Queen to h1, check. The best move in puzzle position is bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes bishop. Rook takes rook, check. Queen takes rook. Rook takes rook. Another one. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook. Rook takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn. Bishop takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using bishop takes knight. Bishop takes bishop. Rook takes queen. Rook takes rook, check. Knight to e1. Another one. The threats are pawn takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Pawn takes pawn, check. Queen to e4, check. Queen to f5, check. The best move in puzzle position is pawn takes pawn, check. King takes pawn. Queen to h3. One more. Threats in this position are king takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to b4, check. Queen to a5, check. The best move in puzzle position is queen to b4, check. King to f2. Queen to d2, check. Queen to e2. Queen takes pawn, check. One more. Here are the threats. Bishop takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are rook to g8, check. Rook to d7, check. Pawn takes pawn, check. The puzzle is solved using pawn takes pawn, check. King takes pawn. Rook to d6, check. Another one. Here are the threats. King takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Pawn takes pawn. Pawn takes knight. The checks are queen to g1, check. Answer to this puzzle is pawn takes knight. Queen takes pawn. King takes bishop. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. The checks are rook to a6, check. b5, check. The puzzle is solved using rook to a6, check. King to b7. Rook takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. The threats are knight takes knight. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The answer is knight takes pawn. Queen to d3. Knight takes bishop. Let's continue. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes knight. Queen takes pawn, check. Here are the checks. Queen to e1, check. Queen to d1, check. Queen to c1, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Rook to g1, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes pawn, check. King to a1. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. One more. The threats are king takes pawn. Checks in puzzle position are rook to g6, check. Rook to h1, check. The answer is rook to h1, check. Rook to h2. Rook takes rook, checkmate. Another one. Threats in this position are rook takes pawn. The checks are c4, check. Rook to e3, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to e3, check. King to c4. Rook takes knight. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. The checks are knight to f5, check. Rook to f3, check. Rook to g2, check. Answer to this puzzle is rook to g2, check. King takes knight. Rook takes rook. Knight to g5, check. King to f5. Let's see the next puzzle. Threats in this position are pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Answer to this puzzle is knight to a4. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Let's see the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are bishop takes knight, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Here are the checks. Bishop takes knight, check. Queen takes knight, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen takes bishop, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Bishop takes knight, check. King to h1. Queen to f2. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes queen. Let's continue. Threats in this position are Queen takes pawn. Queen takes bishop, check. Rook takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are. Queen to d8, check. Queen to h8, check. Queen takes bishop, check. The puzzle is solved using rook takes bishop. Thank you for watching, please like and subscribe.